you don't need a $200 microphone to record your audiobook. You need a microphone that makes your voice sound good, and you need an interface that works, and you need a space that's treated enough that it helps the microphone do its job.
Hello, folks, and welcome to Author Adjacent, a show about the journey from hobbyist writer to professional author. I'm your host, Michael Vadby, author of Crownfall. But more importantly, we have our guest here today. Welcome back, Ben Schenkman, author of My Brother's Keeper, and more importantly for this episode, an audiobook narrator. How you doing, Ben?
I'm doing great, Michael. Thank you for having me back.
Of course. So for this episode, we had you on last week. We were mostly kind of just shooting the shit, talking about you, your book, and how we got to where we are today. But today we want to focus a little more on demystifying audiobook narration, because you have some experience through not only working on your own books, but also for other people's as well, I think.
I have. So I have recorded and produced 2 full-length audiobooks. And when I say full-length, I mean they're my books. It's the full books, but they're still like 6.5 to 7.5 hours a piece. So not like super long, but nonetheless, full-length audiobooks. I also do some part work for Total Immersion Narration, which is a full cast audio production company. And I've also done a short story here and there, most recently for a podcast that I'm blanking on the name of right now exactly. But it was a Clint Baker short story called Pest Control.
Now, this topic is entirely biased to me because this is something I've been very interested for a while. We've talked a little bit offline about it. But we have a list of questions, and I'm just going to dive right into it. Before you hit record on a new book, how much prep do you put into this? Do you do a full read-through with marking up the pages for like character notes or pacing cues? Like, what is your process for preparing to narrate a book?
It's a little different for me because I'm narrating my own books, which means I've read them like 10 times. So I don't do, but the other thing is this is either solo, meaning I do the whole book, or it's dual narration in that I have chapters with named points of view. And, for the second book, for the, it separates the point of view. And again, so this isn't related to my Brother's Keeper. This is for the Devil You Know series. My boss is the devil was all one POV, so I did that whole book myself. And then the second book is dual POV with Nick, the main character, and then Amy, who becomes like a secondary main character. And my partner, Katya, actually narrates Amy's chapters. So it's more, I guess, classic audio narration, because it used to be more popular that you would get dual narration like that instead of the duet narration where you have a single narrator, but then like the characters are done by 2 different people. So like female characters are done by one person, male characters are done by others. That's also like more expensive and complex to do. But I also don't love those audiobooks. I'm a very prolific audiobook listener myself, and I prefer dual narration. So when I had to choose what I was doing for my books, I said I have distinct POVs, and similar to a lot of books that people will be familiar with say Michael Kramer and Kate Redding. That's classic dual narration, where the male POV chapters are done by Michael Kramer, the female POV chapters are done by Kate Redding, and nary the 2 shall meet. So for me, I've already read mine not only ad nauseum, but my first step in editing a book is actually to read it aloud to my partner. So I've already played with the reading and the cadence. but also my audiobook narration style is fairly conversational. So, I'm not overly dramatic. I'm trying to not do I don't have the voice for the in a world narration that people do with but I do characters and accents and things like that, but it's still very, conversational, I'll say. For anyone who's familiar with the narrator from the Kingkiller Chronicles, he has more of that kind of style. Or let's talk indie. Andrew Gibbler's narrator for his series is also kind of similar. So yeah, if I was preparing to do someone else's book, I would at least read through it. I would need notes on the main characters that the author cared about the accent for, or the vocal stylings, because you can't do everything. Like, there are so many characters in a book that are just like side characters that are effectively walk-ons, that if you have to develop a unique voice for all of those, I feel like you would lose your mind. But at least for like the main cast and supporting characters, I would want notes about like, oh, this one has a gruff voice, this one has a high-pitched voice, this one has a speech impediment, and whatever. So if I was doing those solo chapters myself, I would want the character notes, and I would want to do at least a light read through, and then I would probably go from there. For me, I just start hitting record and going because I've already kind of been through that. And I'm the author. I get to decide on the fly what a character sounds like the first time I get to them. Like, literally, I will stop myself and be like, oh man, I just ran into Hazem. Okay, Hazem sounds like this. And then, like, I'll play with it and then usually just go with, like, my first or second attempt.
When you're coming up with those character voices on the fly, then, is there anything that you do to try to make sure that you stay consistent with that character across either a single book or even multiple books, like with the Devil You Know series that you have?
It's a challenge. I tend to refer back to like vocal samples. So like, let's say it's been a week since my last time recording, and I get to a character that I'm like, certain characters I don't have to do too much, because I know, for Amy, when I'm voicing her as a character, it's, I soften my voice, but then I also add like a little bit of like huskiness to it. And I know what that sounds like. I don't have to like practice that one because I've done it enough. But for other characters that I do less often, maybe I did them in the beginning of the book, but then they don't show up until 3/4 of the way through. I have to go back and like listen to a sample and like match that a little bit. But also that comes out in the editing, in that I have one character that I feel like in this latest recording for book 3 that I'm in the process of, I feel like I've been wildly inconsistent with his voice. And so I know for a fact, as I'm going through editing, I'm going to flag his parts so I can then listen to them and pick which ones I need to re-record for consistency. So like, like the shirt says, you can always fix it in post when you're editing if you don't like something. It rarely is there, like, a lot of stuff is going to be fine first take, but things like consistency for voices, I always have notes for that. Like, even for my partner, whose natural they have a natural speaking voice for their main character, but then when they have to voice Nick, there will be times where Nick will sound too much like Amy because it's too close to their natural speaking voice, and I'll have to flag that for a pickup. So yeah, it's a process. You're never going to be 100% consistent all the time unless it's a cast of characters that you are so ground in on. Like, my main cast of characters, I can do without prep. Certain accents I can do without prep because those are accents I've been doing for years, And, for example, in book 1, I have a character with a Russian accent. I have a very specific Russian accent that I do, and that is that character. So I don't have to be like, what does David sound like? David sounds like that Russian accent that you do. And so, like, it really depends on who it is. And the less concrete the accent is, the more complicated it is to get the vocal styling consistent for me. So there is going to be a fair amount of editing and retakes.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Can you walk us through what a typical recording session looks like?
Yeah, a typical recording session is you grab a beverage and then you go into whatever booth it is that you've set up. And by booth, I mean your recording space, whether that's a shelf that you've padded in a closet, whether that's a PVC frame that you've hung packing blankets over, whatever. And we can talk about tech, I'm sure. But you go into your recording space, I use, you have to use a DAW, a digital audio workstation. I open up Reaper. Reaper is my DAW of choice for both feature rich and affordability. And again, we can talk more about that. And then I have the ebook up on half the screen. I have Reaper up on the other. And then I record, and I use what most audiobook narrators use, which is a method called punch and roll, which means you're recording in one track. And as you screw up, because you always screw up, you punch in where you want to re-record from. So you just end up with as reasonable a first recording of a chapter as you can in one track. And I do at least a full chapter at a time. I almost never stop mid-chapter unless like something is wrong, because it is hard to sometimes recreate the exact moment in time of circumstance that makes your voice sound a particular way. Like today, I'll have talked with you, which means if I go record, my voice is going to be a little more warmed up than usual going into it. Or, if I got over a cold 2 days ago, I may still not be exactly 100%, but I'm good enough that I don't sound like nasal. So consistency within a chapter is important, because people will notice within a chapter whether you sound suddenly different. It is less critical to have perfect consistency over an entire book, because you're going to have variations in your voice day to day, and expecting perfection in that, I think, is impossible. So you try to be consistent. You try to recreate the circumstances. If you have a particular vocal warm-up that you do, which frankly I kind of don't, and that's either good or bad. I know other professional audiobook narrators that don't really warm up. It's just kind of how I do it. And I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't warm up. Vocal warm-ups can be very important. But because I'm just speaking, and a lot of my day job is talking, I don't have to de-rust my voice like I'd been sleeping for 8 hours and then warm up. I usually record in the evenings, so my voice is already warmed up from the day.
So how many hours do you typically spend in the booth to record a single chapter then?
At this point, not as many as I used to. So the rule of thumb for audiobook production is that for every finished hour of audio, it will take 4 or 5 to 1, meaning recording, editing, mastering, all of that. It would take you, say, 4 to 5 hours to produce one finished hour of audio. It's usually 2 to 1 for just straight up recording for me. Most of the time is like the biggest time sink in audiobook production is editing, not mastering, but editing itself, because editing is the fiddliest of all of it. So recording is usually 2 to 1. So let's say a chapter is 15 minutes of when I say finished, I mean like first pass finished. So I'll finish recording a chapter, and at the end of that, I'll have 15 minutes of audio, which after editing will not be 15 minutes of audio, but I've got 15 minutes of audio, and maybe it took me a half an hour to 40 minutes to record that. So I usually record 1 to 2 chapters a night when I'm working on it, because again, I don't do any of this full time. And again, my only rule for myself is that I finish a chapter when I'm recording. So I usually do 1 or 2. If I'm really feeling spicy, I can do 3 if it's short chapters. But my chapters range usually anywhere from 15 minutes to 25, 30 minutes of first draft finished audio. So I'm usually in the booth for 1.5, 2 hours max before I want to take a long break until another day.
When you're recording then, do you typically record the whole book and then edit the whole book, or are you recording a chapter, editing a chapter, mastering a chapter, recording a chapter?
No, I believe in not editing as you go, just like I don't believe in editing as you go when you're writing, because otherwise you'll never finish. Editing as you go with audio, I also think prolongs, again, trying to be as consistent as possible. And with this latest book, I'm bad about that because I've had a lot of stops and starts. I have some chapters that were recorded in my basement booth. I have some chapters that are recorded in my temporary bedroom booth because the basement booth is too cold in the winter to record in reliably. So I want to get done with the base level of recording as quickly as humanly possible, barring incident, of which there are plenty. So I definitely don't edit as I go because I want to have everything in the can to edit before I move on to that step. Because that's also, again, the most boring and longest thing. So I'm also putting off that until I have to do it.
So what does your editing and post-production workflow look like then? Are you handling the mastering, the noise removal, the QC yourself, or do you outsource that to someone else?
I do it all myself because it's expensive. The most expensive part of producing an audio. So if you're going to pay for someone else to do it, so this gets into a lot of the choices that indie authors have to make when you're talking about audiobooks. Is, am I going to do it myself, or am I going to have someone else do it? Or you can even say, am I going to record it myself and then have someone else edit it? But what I'll tell you is the per finished hour editing rate is not that dissimilar from a per finished hour audiobook production rate. So if I was going to pay someone else to edit, I would rather just pay someone else to do the whole audiobook because I'm already going to be spending a bunch of money on it. And the thing that I like doing the least is the editing. So again, you have some choices, but I do it all myself. My workflow is I edit as I listen. I listen through at 1x speed. No matter how fast I listen to an audiobook when I am listening, which is 1.35. I have to edit at 1x speed, which makes it take longer. But that's because I'm listening for everything. I have a set of plugins that I use for background noise removal, for click removal, for mouth noise removal, for de-essing. And so I have those are mastering plugins, but I have those plugins active as I'm editing. Because at least for those, I don't EQ it when I'm editing, but I want to know what the plugins will remove versus what I have to still manually remove. Because there are, no matter how good a click remover is, it will not find all the clicks. It will not find all the times that you set a hard K and you need to soften that down. And so my workflow is I listen through. And a lot of the editing is actually splitting tracks and compressing pauses between words. I also, one of the most fundamental choices you have to make as an audiobook producer is, am I going to hear breaths or not? And I'm a breath editor in that I also have a de-breather. Like, I have a plugin that removes breaths to an extent. But even then, like, the way I record is I'll speak, I will pause, I will breathe, I will pause, and then I will continue recording so that I know that that breath will either be taken out or I can edit it out, because I don't love that in audiobooks unless they're intentional. For anyone out there who's listened to the audiobook of The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, it's a great audiobook. The narrator is very talented, but I have never been more aware of a human being breathing in my entire life. And so, like, that's the reason that that's the reason I edit mine out, because it can become distracting to the listener. Like, some people will say, you leave breathing in because it's natural. Well, sure, breathing's natural, but this is also a narration performance, and people don't need to hear me breathing unless it's an intentional breath that's part of, like, spoken dialogue or the text calls for it. If someone's giving a heavy sigh, I may give a heavy sigh, but that's the only breath you're going to hear. So, like, a lot of my editing is taking out pauses between words and sentences, but frankly, just tightening up the cadence. I don't know that everyone does this to the nth degree that I do, but I'm very intentional with making the cadence of the spoken words sound right. And because if they don't, like, that's also distracting. I've listened to a ton of audiobooks, both like traditional professional and also indie professional, because, again, not to say that there's necessarily a quality difference between them. I mentioned the books by R.F. Kuang. That's trad stuff there. That's a professionally produced audiobook by some audiobook production house, and they did things that drove me nuts. So I have a very particular way of editing my audio because I want it to sound as clean and professional as possible. Because no matter how much I can respect that there are certain anomalies that are acceptable within even, like, professionally produced audiobooks, independent authors, especially when we're doing our own books, are up against a stigma that authors narrating their own books can often be bad. And, like, I think it's great that a lot of indie authors are doing it themselves now, because it's giving a bigger library of well-done, audiobooks, like Travis Baldree, as an example. Like, Travis Baldree, who started off as indie, and he does his own audiobooks and is a great narrator. And so, like, you can't say, well, Legends and Lattes audiobook is bad because the author did it himself. It's like, people would come for you if you said that. But I feel like I'm fighting against the stigma of indie authors doing their own audiobooks. So my book has to be more perfect than everyone else's audiobook.
I feel like the same thing happens with just indie publishing in general. Like, yes, a lot of that stigma is going away because the bar of quality is constantly being risen by people who are going that extra mile and putting that extra effort to make sure that, hey, this is a polished product and it is as good, if not better, than anything that is done traditionally. And you're running into the same issues and the same kind of stigma with narrating your own audiobook, because there is that assumption of, like, oh, well, they're too cheap to pay someone else to do it, so it's going to be okay at best. But so you do have to put in that extra effort. You do have to put in that extra pressure on yourself to do better. And it's an unfortunate thing that it is the way it is, but it also makes it more accessible for everybody. But like I said, I love seeing that the bar is constantly raising in quality in both these avenues.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of really good reviews of my audiobooks. Like people have found them to be not just high quality, but also like well done from a performance standpoint. So I'm happy about the results.
Yeah, I listened to Incident at the Peeling Head by E.L. Montague, and I had listened to that book, and then I had him on the show, and I learned on the show that he was the narrator for the book, and I was like, I had no idea. And that's kind of the attitude that you want a lot of your readers to go into it, is you want them to not know that the narrator is the author unless they're actually looking at the what's the word, like the name on it and stuff like that. In the same way that you want your indie book to not people know that it's indie. It's so good you can't tell.
Yeah, I will say, though, there is a contingent of audiobook listeners that is not small that does prefer author-narrated books.
Really?
Yeah, because no one will interpret a book the same as the author will interpret a book. So, like,
that's fair.
Yes, you will get a great narration with other audiobook narrators, but some readers really want the experience of hearing the book as intended to be read by the author. So, like, in counterpoint to myself, like, you're fighting against
Devil's
that.
advocate.
Yeah, you're fighting against that stigma, but at the same time, there are plenty of people who say, "No, I want you, author, to narrate your own book because no one is going to do it the way that it's meant to be other than you."
That is encouraging. I do like to hear that. So a lot of authors, especially indie authors, really underestimate how long an audiobook takes. I know we talked about this earlier, but especially going from I'm going to do this to an actual finished product on the digital shelves, how many roughly total hours went into work into producing your audiobooks?
So let's talk about the first one, because the first one is the hardest, because you are going to learn things and your workflow is going to get faster. You're going to have to re-record less like full chapters. You're going to get better at things. So my ratio of work hours to finished hours, I know I had said like rule of thumb is 4 or 5. Some really good professionals can like do 3, but those are people who have really got it down to a science in a way that I think most people would find unachievable. My first book, though, because I was learning so much, I was probably, instead of 4 to 5, I was probably closer to 6 to 7 hours of work per finished hour of audio, because I didn't just edit once. Like, I hadn't invested in some of the plugins that I have now on my first editing pass of the book. And then I was listening to it and I said, I can't stand some of these things that I hear. And then I invested in a group of plugins called RX, which is like repair, by a company called Isotope, Isotope. And they are like a gold standard in audiobook mastering plugins or audio mastering plugins at all, for things like, say, mouth noises, because most declickers and de-essers don't actually get rid of mouth noises. But Isotope RX suite, the standard suite, not the like introductory suite, has a mouth noise plugin. And I decided that since I was not doing just one of these books, but you can't change narrators midstream. So once I recorded the first book, I was committed to doing all of the books. And so it was worth it to me to invest a little bit in that plugin suite to then not lose my mind trying to edit out all of the sounds that I didn't like or figure out how to record without having those sounds, because like there's a whole process people do for eliminating as much mouth noise as possible. You know, some people eat apples, some people use lollipops or sour candy or whatever. There's like a ton of like always having chapstick. And I am too neurospicy to be consistent with any of that. And so I got technical help that I can then apply to all of my stuff going forward. So you do have to invest a certain amount in doing audiobook narration to be able to put out a professional sounding finished product that isn't just your microphone. And even then, like, microphones are less important than the space that you're recording in, because a great mic will sound bad in an untreated space, and a mediocre mic will sound great in a treated space. And I've recorded my audiobooks using fairly budget but well suited mics. But yeah, so like my first audiobook is 7-ish hours, and if it took me 6 or 7 hours to produce a finished hour of audio, you're talking anywhere from you know what, I can't do math right now, 40 to, is that what it is? What's, Michael, tell me what 6 times 7 is right now.
6 times 7,
42.
I think that's 40. Yeah, 42.
Okay, great. All right, we're here.
You had it right.
All right, so it's like somewhere between 40 and 50 hours of work to produce my first audiobook, because I had some chapters, like my first 3 chapters at least, maybe even 4 chapters, I had not gotten into what my audiobook narration voice, like regular narration voice, sounded like. And so I had to re-record my first 4 chapters. So that was like, you know, just audio that was trashed and redone, let alone all of the editing that had to go into it. So yeah, you're going to probably do at least 6 hours of work for every finished hour of audio on your first effort. But the good news is, if you're going to do more than one, or if you're going to do this as like a sideline, because it's also potentially a good way to make some extra money, or some people are doing it full time, you know. But the good news is you will get faster. Like I said, right now I'm close to 4 hours of work for a finished hour of audio.
Nice. No, that is a vast improvement. So what does that look like for a timeline wise? You said roughly about 42 hours of work. Is that something you did within a single month, or is it something that took across multiple months to do?
Usually across at least a few months.
Okay.
It's tough. It's, you know, because not only do I not just have this project, I have many projects, you know, and while I want these audiobooks to be out, I also want to publish new books. And so I have to decide which projects to prioritize. So, you know, even with the booth problem, because you have to have at least a somewhat comfortable booth, and a New England basement that's unheated is not maybe the best choice, no matter how good it sounds. So I deprioritized that. So it usually over a few months. In some cases, it might be over the course of 6 months, because, you know, I'm still finishing up the first recording of book 3. I'm on like the last 3 chapters, so I should be able to finish that up in the next week or so, and then dive into editing. But yeah, this is a part-time gig for most people. You know, I know a lot of people are trying to hang out their shingle for being a full-time voice actor or voiceover artist, but that's not the most of us.
Yeah. Especially since if you are an author who is doing this, most of us have our regular day job, and then we have the job of being an author. And now in like your case and a few other people's, you have the third job of being a narrator. And that's on top of all of the supporting things of like the marketing and the logistics, and just trying to make sure that your art that you are creating is being sold. It's a lot of time. It's a big time investment.
It is. I enjoy it. Like, so don't get me wrong. I think if an author chooses to narrate and produce their own audiobooks, I think it can be a very worthwhile endeavor. You just have to accept that it, like your other books, is a time commitment, and you can only do so many things at once.
Yeah. No, that's very fair. Unfortunately, the most limiting factor that anyone has in their life is time. So you have to prioritize what is important to you. And that's just a lesson you can take literally into anything. It's just a good thing to remember. But we talked about this a little bit in some of the recent answers. Let's start talking a little bit about gear. Like, what are you working with as far as your microphone, your interface, your DAW, and like acoustic treatment? How is your setup like evolved over time?
Yeah, so my first book was actually not recorded on the mics that I'm using now. My first book was recorded on the Audio-Technica version of the Shure SM58, which is like the studio microphone, or not studio microphone, but like if you see a concert and you see someone with a thing that looks like a vocal mic, that is a Shure SM58. That's just what it is. Because they are reliable, they're affordable, and everyone uses them for a reason. I recorded on an Audio-Technica version of that. It's a dynamic microphone, which another thing you have to decide as a narrator is, are you using a dynamic mic or a condenser mic? And we can get into the differences between those. But my original setup was this AT, like, whatever, 2040 or whatever, which is that SM58 clone. And I was using a Fifine SC1 interface, which Fifine is a Chinese company. They put out some really high quality gear for the price. And the SC1 is enough to get started with. And I could talk about why I upgraded that later, but that was my first setup. I have a closet, like literally over here, I have a closet that I took one of the shelves and I took one of those like egg crate foam memory toppers and stuffed it in there until it was like a box laying on its side. And I got a boom arm and I stuffed a monitor in there and ran the cables out of the closet because I didn't want to have, like, you don't want computer noise where you're recording. So I run the cables out of the closet and into the laptop that I was working with. And that was my original setup. I hung a packing blanket behind me to prevent some of the noise reflection and a little bit of the ambient noise. But that was it. That's where I recorded the first book with. I also didn't love some of the overall characteristics of my voice with that microphone. And so one of the plugins that I invested a smaller amount of money in was a different isotope, and it was their like base level like product that kind of took it and honeyed up like the vocal quality, because I felt like that microphone, which is, I was recording with the best that I had at the time, I didn't love some of the, it's not that it was tinny, like that's not, I would have scrapped the whole thing if it had sounded tinny, but there was a vocal quality that I didn't love. It seemed a little too sharp. And so I got a plugin that I ran all the tracks through, and it made it much better. To the point where I was happy with it and said, okay, great. This is good enough. I am done, because otherwise I'm going to throw all of this out the window and never do it again. My evolution is using Fifine's microphones. So for anyone who doesn't know, the microphone that Michael Vadney is speaking into is the Fifine K688, which is their version of the budget entry Shure SM7B. And for anyone who doesn't know, if you've watched a podcast in your life and you saw the black microphone that's kind of like a cylinder and it's a little fatter in the middle and kind of tapered on the ends, that's a Shure SM7B, and they are multiple hundreds of dollars. And not just that, you need a cloud lifter for the SM7B, to the point where Shure has introduced the SM7DB, because they're like, oh, sorry, you need a cloud lifter. We're just going to build a booster into this one. So now you pay us more, but you don't have to buy a cloud lifter. So like, I wanted a Shure SM7B, but I did not want to spend the $400 to $500 on the microphone and the cloud lifter to make that feasible, because what I found was my voice is, I'm sure you're all shocked to hear this. My voice is not deep. My vocal range is higher. And so in the condenser versus dynamic, debate, so a dynamic mic is different than, like, so a condenser is a cardioid microphone. It's different hardware, and a condenser is much more sensitive to everything. So you're going to get really good, crisp vocals with a condenser mic. But if you don't have a well-treated space, your microphone is going to hear an animal fart in the next house that is down the street from you. I was working with a booth that was on an exterior wall of my house, and even my dynamic mic would pick up rumbles from the street, to the point where it was like Wayne's World. I had to like pause when a truck went by, and then, it's like, game on, I get to record now. So I knew for a fact that both for where I was recording and my voice, that I wanted a dynamic mic, because dynamic mics are going to have, like I say, that the plugin that I used like honeyed up the voice a bit. Dynamic mics usually have a slight deepening quality to give a richness to your voice, that if you have a deep voice, could end up making your voice sound muddy. So maybe depending on your voice, you should use a condenser mic, because no mic is the right fit for everyone. There's a vocal coach that I don't love, and I won't name names because I'm not a jerk like that, but like, they basically say, if you're getting into voice acting and you're not using a Rode NT1, which is a very like popular, well-recognized condenser microphone, high quality, Rode makes a good product, it's a great mic. My voice doesn't sound good with condenser mics. Like, if anything, I feel like my voice sounds higher than it actually is using a condenser mic, because of the vocal ranges that it picks up. And so the post-processing that I would have to do to make my voice sound the way that I liked it using a condenser mic, when I use the Fifine K688, I am not sponsored or anything by this company, but if you're listening, like, reach out. That's cool. And,
just a big fan.
Yeah. So just to shout out a different person, there's actually, he's a voice actor and coach, a guy named David Saltura. He's a big fan of the Fifine series. So the mic that I'm on, that's actually the Fifine AM8, which is like a close cousin to the K688, but it's a little bit different. It doesn't have quite as much deepening, so it isn't like a Shure SM7B clone, but it's related. They're both sold as gaming mics, and they both cost $75 or less, and you can often get them on sale for like 50-something bucks. And you would not believe the quality that you'll get out of these microphones. You don't need a $200 microphone to record your audiobook. You need a microphone that makes your voice sound good, and you need an interface that works, and you need a space that's treated enough that it helps the microphone do its job. My new setup is a dedicated booth either in the basement, which I actually took like a kind of unused box in the wall and put up sound foam and a curtain, and that was it. Like it actually sounds really, really good. But in the cold, I also kind of did a similar thing in that I have a sliding door closet that I put like a shower curtain kind of thing so that I can open the closet. I have half a booth. I did the sound foam, and then I close myself in with a packing blanket. So it's my like booth away from booth, home away from home. But I use the Fifine K688, and I use the Scarlett Solo, the Focusrite Scarlett Solo. And the only reason that I upgraded is because I do intend at some point to like do more audio for other people. And some tech requirements call for 24-bit audio. ACX and other, like if you do Authors Republic or whatever, and because audiobook distribution is another thing we could talk about, but they don't care about 24-bit audio. So if you use something like the Fifine SE1, if you use PreSonus, if you use, whatever, they don't care about that. But if you're like contracting, some tech requirements require 24-bit audio. And so the Scarlett Solo is the cheapest and most reliable piece of hardware. Not only is it a good product, but then it also meets the 24-bit audio tech requirement.
No, that's a good rundown of like a lot of things. And we've had this similar conversation before where we went over a lot of this stuff in detail. And I remember I had a lot of notes to go over to look up a lot of these things for how they interact and stuff. But the important thing about all that stuff is the barrier of entry to doing this is lower than most people would think. Like, you don't have to spend thousands of dollars to make this possible. Just like we were saying in the last episode with the book cover and stuff. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars in order to make this part of your repertoire.
Yeah, and you can, so like the K688 being what it is, and like for the record, if you need a condenser mic, you don't have to get the Rode NT1. There are other like perfectly good condenser mics that people are doing professional audio with all the time. If I was going to go with a condenser mic, I probably would go with a Rode NT1 just because it is a gold standard for a reason. But again, my voice doesn't sound good with a condenser mic. I have an AKG P220, which is a condenser mic that is similar it's honestly similar in quality to a Rode NT1. The AKG P220, if you buy it new, it's still going to set you back like $150. The Rode NT1, you can usually get like $250. It's not too dissimilar of a range. And I did a vocal sample, and I shared it with people, the K688 versus the AKG P220. No one wanted me to use the P220. They said, no, your voice sounds great. And that's the other thing is like, you know how I said there would be post-production to get it sounding the way that I wanted? For the Fifine K688, I almost don't have to EQ it. I almost don't have to do anything to have my voice sound the way that I like it to sound. When I said I had that Audio-Technica like Shure SM58 clone, and I had to apply all these plugins to give it that kind of richer tone, and that was a dynamic mic. It just wasn't the same dynamic mic. The K688, I barely have to do anything with. I'll still apply my vocal chain. I do two different EQs of it. There's a lot of things that I will do, but if I released the audiobook edited and did no mastering to it, it would actually still sound like pretty good as is. So I love the microphone.
So we are nearing towards the end of our time on this episode. I did want to ask you one more question.
Yeah.
For an indie author who's considering getting their own setup and working on their own audiobook for the first time, what would you say is the one piece of equipment or the one strategy that would make the biggest difference for them, where they should invest either the time or the effort into?
Time, effort. I mean, in some cases, it is a little bit of money. Like sometimes the right answer is to throw some money at it. But the reality is you should see what you can do before investing heavily in plugins. Because again, if you record and you do a good enough job of it that you feel like you don't need to throw plugins at it to fix some of those things, then you don't need that. So I would say put some time into practicing what your audiobook narration voice is, because you're going to spend less time redoing those initial chapters where you're trying to find your voice. Like, it's going to happen. Like,